Heydrich apparently hates the moniker the good people of Prague have bestowed on him. But I, on the other hand, love my unofficial title, precisely because I've earned it.
A lot of movie fans and critics agree. Hans Landa is one of the most memorable and striking villains in film history. Even Quentin Tarantino himself has called him the best character he's ever created. And honestly, it's hard to argue with that.
You're sheltering enemies of the state, are you not?
Yes.
You're sheltering them underneath your floorboards, aren't you?
So it's no surprise Landa has been analyzed to death. His behavior, motives, and decisions still spark heated debates. Why didn't he arrest Shosanna when he clearly recognized her at the cafe?
Il y avait une autre chose que je voulais vous demander, mais maintenant, sur ma vie, impossible de m'en souvenir.
Why was he so insistent that she be the one running the projector on the night of the premiere?
C'est vous qui actionnerez les projecteurs.
And why did he personally kill Bridget von Hammersmark instead of just handing her over to the Gestapo?
Was jetzt, Oberst?
There are tons of questions, but I think there's one theory that might actually bring everything together. One idea that makes all those moments line up in a way that finally makes sense. And that's exactly what this video is about. Before we dive into the main theory, let's quickly revisit what happens in the film. The story takes place in Nazi-occupied France during the 1940s. SS Colonel Hans Landa, nicknamed the Jew Hunter, shows up at a quiet farmhouse under the pretense of a routine inspection.
C'est un plaisir de vous rencontrer, Monsieur Lapadit, le colonel SS Hans Landa.
But behind all the politeness is a calculated and predatory interrogation. His goal, to force the truth out at any cost.
You're sheltering enemies of the state, are you not?
The hidden Jewish family is discovered and killed, except for one girl, Shosanna, who manages to escape. Years later, she's living under a false identity and running a small cinema. And it's in that very theater, ironically, that a Nazi propaganda film is scheduled to premiere, with Hitler and the top brass of the Third Reich in attendance. At the same time, a squad of American commandos, known as the Inglourious Basterds, is on a mission to blow up the entire Nazi leadership inside that theater.
An American Secret Service outfit that lives deep behind enemy lines will be your assist.
But really, all of that is just the backdrop. The real tension begins every time Hans Landa steps into the frame.
Monsieur, à votre famille et à vos vaches, je dis bravo.
Sometimes, when you rewatch the movie, it starts to feel like the real main character isn't Shosanna, or Rain, or even Hitler. It's Hans Landa. Every scene he's in feels like its own short film, fully formed, perfectly timed, and crafted with precision. Tarantino once said that Landa's scenes are basically interrogations. But honestly, they feel more like theater. A real interrogation is about getting answers, but Landa usually already knows everything before the conversation even starts. For him, it's not about the outcome. It's about the performance, the style, the control, the subtle dominance. He's the director, the actor, and the only audience member who truly gets the show. Everyone else in the room? Just props on his stage. And in the end, he loves revealing his cards. Not to get a confession, but to let the other person realize just how far behind they've been all along. Only then is the performance truly complete.
Würden Sie bitte in die rechte untere Innentasche meines Mantels greifen und mir geben, was Sie darin finden? You're sheltering enemies of the state, are you not?
Es ist gestern Vormittag passiert.
Und wo genau in Paris ist dieser Berg?
The climax of every one of Landa's performances is that moment when his target suddenly realizes he's known everything all along. That's when the polite conversation falls apart, and something much darker creeps in. Take the cafe scene with Shosanna Dreyfus. Landa plays it to perfection. First, the milk. It's not just a drink, it's a direct callback to the dairy farm where she barely escaped with her life.
Et pour la demoiselle, un verre de lait.
A soft gesture, but sharp as a knife. He watches her reaction like a cat watching a trapped mouse.
Ceci est une simple formalité. Aucune raison de vous inquiéter.
Then comes the strudel with cream, a dessert that, back then, was often made with pork fat, which would have made it off-limits for Jews who followed kosher law.
Avez-vous goûté le strudel ici?
And according to those same laws, you're also not supposed to mix meat and dairy.
Veuillez m'excuser, j'ai oublié de commander la crème.
Especially not so soon after eating meat.
Attendez la crème.
Now, Shosanna probably didn't stick to religious rules. She was living under a fake identity, surrounded by enemies. But Landa's not trying to catch her breaking kosher. He's pressing on something deeper. Memory, trauma, fear. Every move he makes is part of a psychological trap, carefully built for one reason: to enjoy the feeling of complete control. Of course, it's important to remember that not all Jewish people strictly followed kosher rules, especially under Nazi occupation. Those dietary laws were mostly important to Orthodox Jews, while secular Jews often let them slide, especially when survival was on the line. Looking at Shosanna, her style, her behavior, how she lived, she didn't seem religious at all. So eating a non-kosher dessert wouldn't have been a big deal for her. But that's not the point. Landa wasn't testing her faith. He was building psychological pressure. The strudel and the cream weren't just food. They were symbols, heavy hints, meant just for her. He wasn't checking for kosher. He was checking her nerves. And then comes the moment he's been working toward.
Il y avait une autre chose que je voulais vous demander.
He pauses, not awkwardly, but with dramatic precision, like an actor waiting for the perfect beat. He watches her squirm, senses her anxiety rising, and only then does he drop the line.
Mais maintenant, sur ma vie, impossible de m'en souvenir. Bon, ce ne devait pas être important.
It's not a confession he's after. It's a display, a final little flourish of control. He could ruin her right then and there, but instead, he keeps the show going. Here's an interesting detail. Almost every one of Landa's interrogations involves food or drink.
Avez-vous goûté le strudel ici? Ending the war tonight.
But it's not just background flavor, it's part of the ritual. He doesn't act like an SS officer, he acts like a gourmet, carefully deciding how to serve the person across from him. Because really, that person is the main course. Milk, wine, strudel with cream, his pipe.
May I smoke my pipe as well?
These aren't just props, they're tools, instruments he uses to set the tone of the scene. It's like he's flipping through a menu, choosing the perfect way to savor his next victim. And he does it all with this elegant politeness, almost theatrically, like he's playing Sherlock Holmes, not conducting an interrogation. And the deeper the story goes, the clearer it becomes. Landa isn't a true believer. He wears the Nazi uniform, sure, but for him, it's just a costume. One he'll happily take off the second it's no longer useful. Beliefs, principles, that's not his style. He plays for whichever side benefits him most. It's not ideology, it's pure opportunism. At the start of the movie, he proudly embraces the nickname, the Jew Hunter.
I, on the other hand, love my unofficial title, precisely because I've earned it.
By the end, he shrugs it off as just something people call him.
Finding people is my specialty, so naturally I worked for the Nazis finding people, and yes, some of them were Jews, but Jew Hunter, just a name that stuck.
Landa always stays 2 steps ahead. He reads the game faster and plays it better than anyone else in the room. And now we get to the key moment, Operation Kino. How did Landa once again end up in the right place, at the right time, knowing more than everyone else? The answer might lie in a theory that sounds crazy at first, but stick with me. Think back to that scene near the end of the movie, where Landa gets on the radio and starts listing off his demands to the Allies.
So when the military history of this night is written, it will be recorded that I was part of Operation Kino from the very beginning as a double agent.
What if he's not improvising at all? What if that entire moment is just him reading from a plan he's had all along? What if Operation Kino wasn't the brainchild of British intelligence, but of Hans Landa himself? Sounds wild, I know, but hear me out. I think there's real evidence to support the idea that Landa wasn't just part of the mission. He was directing the whole thing. Let's rewind to one of the most intense scenes in the film. The bar in the basement. Hickox, Stiglitz, and Wiki show up to meet with Bridget von Hammersmark. The place is tense. It feels like something could go wrong at any second, but technically, everything's going according to plan. And then, boom, a coincidence. A group of German soldiers shows up celebrating the birth of a baby.
Aber die Frau des Oberfeldwebels da drüben hat gerade ein Kind bekommen.
But they're not the ones who seem out of place. The real red flag? Major Hellstrom. He doesn't fit in. He's not drinking, not celebrating, just watching. We've actually seen him before. He shows up briefly during the theater prep scene.
Je comprends pas. Qu'est-ce que j'ai fait?
Sie will wissen, was sie getan hat. Beweg deinen Arsch ins Auto.
Chances are, he works for the same department as Landa. Maybe he even reports directly to him. His methods feel familiar, cold, calculated, focused on psychology.
Nein, natürlich störe ich. Natürlich störe ich. Meine Herrschaften, gestatten Sie, dass ich Ihnen nachschenke und dann werde ich Ihnen und dem Fräulein Adieu sagen.
He zeroes in on Hickox's accent almost instantly, latches onto tiny details, and doesn't let go.
Ich muss sagen, ich habe genug von dem Affentheater.
He even correctly identifies the hometowns of the disguised soldiers.
Ich habe nicht mit Ihnen gesprochen, Obersturmführer München. Auch nicht mit Ihnen, Obersturmführer Frankfurt.
Information Landa later repeats almost word for word.
Das sind die beiden deutschstämmigen Mitglieder der Bastards.
That's probably not a coincidence. It's a trace, a sign of coordination. It's worth pointing out again. Landa casually repeats the same information about those undercover soldiers later on. That adds another piece to the puzzle. It starts to look like Major Hellstrom didn't just stumble into that bar. He wasn't there to drink or hang out. He was working. And his real target? Probably not the British agents. More likely, Bridget von Hammersmark. There are a few details that suggest Hellstrom is connected to Landa. First, his approach feels very familiar. He watches closely, picks at small inconsistencies, and knows exactly when to apply pressure. And second, it's Landa who shows up at the scene right after the shootout.
Ja, Hugo.
Almost like he knew it was going to happen. And when he gets there, he doesn't act like someone stumbling into chaos. He acts like a man following a plan. He studies the bodies, calmly lays out what happened one by one, and when he doesn't find Hammersmark's body, but does find her scarf, he realizes she's probably still alive.
Bridget von Hammersmark.
That's important. Without her, the entire plan falls apart. She's the one who's supposed to lead the bastards into the theater, and then there's that moment where he waves off the other soldiers. Not out of concern, but to clear the room, to get rid of potential witnesses. Any trace of Hammersmark's involvement could blow the whole mission. So, what does he do? He quietly picks up her scarf and her shoe, the two things that could connect her to what just happened. And remember how Hellstrom suddenly snaps at Hammersmark during their conversation?
Also Sturmbannführer. Schnauze, du Schlampe.
It felt like he already knew who she really was, and chances are, so did Landa. But he didn't arrest her, he let her go. Why? Same reason he let Shosanna live. Because knowing something is more powerful when you wait to use it. Landa doesn't destroy pieces. He keeps them in play, just in case he needs them later. So how do you use a British spy to your advantage? Easy. Feed her the kind of intel she'd see as a golden opportunity. Tell her there's going to be a film premiere at a little cinema in Paris, and that Hitler himself, along with the entire Nazi high command, will be there.
And you need all four to end the war.
Sounds like the perfect target, right? The Allies wouldn't even think twice. They'd jump on it instantly. Now picture this. Landa already sees the writing on the wall. Germany's losing the war. Even Hitler admits things are falling apart in one of the scenes.
Und während die letzten Wochen verstrichen und der Amerikaner an der Küste gelandet ist.
So, what's a guy like Landa supposed to do? A man known as the Jew Hunter, with a record full of war crimes? Sitting in a courtroom in Nuremberg is the last thing he wants. But what if he's the one who ends the war? What if he hands over the entire Nazi leadership to the Allies, ties it all up in one clean operation, and wipes the slate clean? Suddenly, he's not a war criminal. He's a hero, maybe even someone valuable to the other side. And that's why Operation Kino makes perfect sense for Landa.
Since Hitler's death or possible rescue rests solely on my reaction?
Sure, on paper it looked like Bridget von Hammersmark's plan.
One could even say that Operation Kino was her brainchild.
Indeed.
But let's be honest, she was just the actress in the story, the performer. Landa? He was the writer, the director, and the man pulling every string behind the scenes. He wasn't just part of the show, he He was the one who staged it.
I was part of Operation Kino from the very beginning as a double agent.
So what exactly supports the theory that Operation Kino was Landa's idea all along? First off, he knew way too much.
Explosive still around the ankle, still ready to explode.
As soon as the bastards are captured, the dynamite strapped to their legs is removed immediately. No hesitation, no confusion. It's like they already knew exactly what to look for. Second, Landa takes a seat on the balcony with a perfect view of the whole theater. That's not a random spot. That's the vantage point of someone overseeing the entire operation. He recognizes Hammersmark and her guests right away and just watches them, waiting for the right moment to strike. Just like he did with Shosanna, he lets the tension build to the breaking point, when lying is no longer an option.
Es ist gestern Vormittag passiert.
Wo genau in Paris ist dieser Berg?
And then suddenly backs off.
Ich mach doch nur Scherze. Gnädiges Fräulein, Sie kennen mich doch. Meine Scherze sind ein bisschen grob.
Letting them believe they still have a choice. It's the same stage play formula. Landa also knew exactly where the guests would be sitting.
Both Omar and Donowitz should be sitting in the very seats we left them in, 0023 and 0024.
His men were already in position, and on top of that, there was even a vehicle ready to transport the prisoners. Fully equipped with a radio operator who could contact British intelligence.
Over there is a very capable two-way radio, and sitting behind it is a more than capable radio operator.
That's not luck. That's a plan. A precise, carefully orchestrated plan. He even knew who was running the operation on the Allied side, the general.
I'm sure this mission of yours has a commanding officer, a general.
You could try chalking that up to intuition, but let's be real. That's a little too accurate to be a guess. Most likely, he already had all the info, and the meeting with Aldo Rain was just a way to confirm how much was true. And the biggest giveaway? He knew the name of the operation. No one ever says it out loud in the film.
I was part of Operation Kino from the very beginning as a double agent.
So, how did he know? That's not a coincidence. That's a clear sign he was in the loop from the very beginning. Let's go back to something else. Why didn't Landa turn in Shosanna? And why was he so insistent that she be the one running the projector during the premiere?
Au revoir, Shosanna!
At first glance, those choices seem weird, but if you accept that Landa already knew what was going on, suddenly it all starts to make sense. Most likely, after she escaped, Landa never really lost track of Shosanna. For someone with his power and access, finding a single girl hiding somewhere in occupied France wouldn't have been difficult. But he didn't hunt her down. He waited.
I'm a detective. A damn good detective. Finding people is my specialty.
Because, as we've seen, Landa isn't driven by ideology or emotion. He's a strategist. He doesn't act out of revenge. He makes moves only when they benefit him. When Landa finds out the film premiere is happening at a theater run by Shosanna, the same girl he let escape years ago, he immediately sees the opportunity. Someone with her backstory and trauma wouldn't just let this pass. If Nazi leaders are going to be packed into her theater, there's no way she doesn't have a plan, and Landa knows it. To him, Shosanna becomes Plan B, a hidden backup. If, for whatever reason, his own scheme doesn't go off as intended, he can still fall back on hers. And assigning her to the projector booth? That's not about protocol, it's about control. He wants to know where she is, what she's doing, and exactly when she might make her move. She's another piece on his chessboard. In the end, both plans succeed. The theater goes up in flames, and the dynamite under the seats explodes. And once again, Landa insists on one thing, that Shosanna must be the one in the projection room.
C'est vous qui actionnerez les projecteurs.
The excuse he gives, that a black technician would raise eyebrows at a Nazi film premiere, feels more like a cover story. After all, the projection booth is closed off. No one would have seen who was running the reels. The real reason? Control. Landa doesn't want Shosanna acting too early and ruining his perfectly staged operation. By putting her in the projection booth, he solves two problems at once. First, he knows exactly where she is. Second, if she does decide to take revenge, she'll most likely wait until the very end, when the theater is full. and he's already long gone. Now let's talk about another key player, Bridget von Hammersmark. Why did Landa kill her himself? He could have handed her over to the Gestapo. He could have followed standard protocol, but he didn't. He took care of it personally. Some people say it was revenge.
When you purchase friends like Bridget von Hammersmark, you get what you pay for.
But that's not Landa's style. He doesn't act out of emotion. Remember, he didn't go after Shosanna, even though he clearly knew who she was and where she was hiding. So the reason has to be something else. Landa's not a vengeful man. He's a strategist, and if he chose to eliminate Hammersmark, it means she was in the way. What exactly was she threatening? We'll get into that in the next section. But for now, let's break it down. There are at least 3 solid reasons why Landa made the decision to kill Bridget von Hammersmark himself. The first reason is practical. Her presence is just getting in the way. Landa needs to capture Aldo and Udovic as quietly as possible. No drama, no attention. But when you've got a famous actress hanging around, that's impossible. Too many eyes, too much curiosity, too many people watching. One sudden move in her direction and the whole plan could fall apart. If she were officially arrested, word would spread fast. And who knows what that might trigger. The second reason? Pure theater. Landa just can't pass up the chance to stage one more performance. He sits Hammersmark down, hangs her coat behind her with the shoe tucked neatly in the pocket. The final visual touch. For him, this isn't just an interrogation. It's a scene, staged to perfection, where he's once again the director, the actor, and the only audience that matters. But the third reason, the biggest one, is security. Hammersmark knows too much.
Well, let's just say she got what she deserved.
She's a longtime British agent, and if we go with the theory that this whole operation was actually Landa's creation, then she's a serious threat. If she talks, the whole story falls apart, including the carefully crafted persona of a double agent that Landa plans to sell to the Allies. Her silence is the only thing keeping his version of events intact.
Was jetzt, Oberst?
And that's what Landa is all about. Patience, calculation, and a deep love for his own twisted games. Every move he makes feels like part of a larger performance. And Operation Kino? That's the big finale. The final act of a play where every role has been carefully assigned. And there's only one true director. Him. Alright, you might be thinking, let's say Landa did feed Hammersmark the idea for the operation. But how did he know the bait worked? And how could he possibly know all the little details of the plan that barely anyone else knew? To me, the answer is pretty clear. Landa had his own sources. Who actually knew about Operation Kino? The circle was incredibly small.
Lieutenant Archie Hickox, reporting south. General Ed Fennick.
Winston Churchill, General Ed Fennick, and Lieutenant Archie Hickox. Churchill's basically untouchable. He's out. But the other two? They raise questions. Let's start with Hickox.
I'm a film critic.
It says here that you speak German fluently.
He's a film critic by trade, speaks fluent German, and is obsessed with German cinema.
The first book was called Art of the Eye, the Heart and the Mind, a study of German cinema in the 20s. The second one was called 24 Frame Da Vinci. It's a subtextual film criticism study of the work of German director G.W. Pabst.
Sure, he's officially working for British intelligence, but with that kind of background, maybe he was vulnerable to German influence.
Are you familiar with German cinema under the Third Reich?
Yes.
I mean, if Bridget von Hammersmark could secretly work for the British, why couldn't a critic moving in the same circles be tied to the other side?
Goebbels considers the films he's making to be the beginning of a new era in German cinema.
How's he doing?
Quite well.
Now, let's talk about the general. His rank doesn't make him untouchable. Information could have leaked from someone close to him, a personal aide, a wiretap, even something small that slipped through the cracks. And let's be honest, tiny leaks like that are exactly the kind of thing Landa is a master at exploiting. And finally, Hammersmark herself. We already saw she was being watched, which means whoever was tailing her also knew about her contacts, what she was up to, and what info she had. So when you put that together, the idea that Landa knew about Operation Kino from the very beginning doesn't sound crazy at all anymore. Taking everything we've discussed into account, the version where Bridget von Hammersmark is the real mastermind behind Operation Kino feels less and less convincing.
One could even say that Operation Kino was her brainchild.
Sure, she was the contact on the ground, but in reality, everything points to something else entirely. Hans Landa wasn't just informed, he was in charge. His actions, his calm, the way he knew every little detail, how he was always 2 steps ahead, it all lines up with someone who designed the mission, not just stumbled into it. He knew too much. He eliminated threats before they even showed up on the radar. He moved like someone who had already read the script, probably because he wrote it. Operation Kino wasn't some improvisation by an actress. It was a carefully directed production, and the director's name was Hans Landa. But now it's your turn. What do you think about this theory? Do you agree that Landa was the real mastermind behind the plan? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if there's another iconic movie villain you'd like me to break down next, drop their name below. Who knows? They just might be the star of the next video.